We have quorum? Okay. Where's Rayanne?
Maybe because we lost that blood, those two like, breathe. They're kind of key.
It's funny
No, they fixed this one.
Good morning. Welcome to the City Planning Commission. Today is Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. Madam Secretary.
Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held in Spector Hall, 22 Reade Street. Today is Wednesday, November 15, 2017. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and beepers. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago. Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Bessel.
Here.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner Delaus.
Here.
Commissioner Duet.
Here.
Commissioner Edie. Commissioner Ephron.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, November 1st, 2017.
On the minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The minutes are approved.
Scheduling on calendar numbers 1 through 11, we have resolutions for adoption. Scheduling Wednesday, November 29, 2017 for a public hearing to be held in Spector Hall, 22 Reade Street.
On the resolutions, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The resolutions are adopted.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 89. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 12, CD 6, N180082ZRM, in the matter of an application for a zoning text amendment concerning the East River 50 Sutton Place, for a favorable report as modified on calendar number 12. Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Thank you. As this commission knows, it has taken time and effort to get this proposal to this point where it is ready for a commission vote. Area-wide text amendments are rarely simple matters, and this project illustrates the critical importance of a careful and deliberate application review process undertaken by department staff with the applicants. In this case, department staff have provided extensive feedback to the applicants regarding their initial application, which caused significant policy concern and was subsequently withdrawn, and have also provided policy guidance on the application that is before us today. We have heard compelling testimony regarding the unique nature of this zoning district and concerns regarding the potential for development of very tall buildings. I think we all acknowledge that this area already features a large number of very large buildings, as well as mid-rise and lower structures, and that this highly varied built character warrants a sensitive and nuanced response. Height limits are not the answer in a varied and high-density district such as this, but it is important that an appropriate balance is struck to allow flexibility in built form, a reasonable expectation that permitted floor area may be fully utilized, and provide predictability for local residents that new developments will be appropriately scaled for this high-density residential zoning district. We have also heard compelling testimony regarding the potential effect of this text on a specific development site, and assertions that this proposal is simply a means to put a halt to that project. My consideration of every application that comes before me as a commissioner is based on my evaluation of the broad planning rationale for the proposal. This application is no different. This text amendment would apply to 10 blocks within the Sutton Place neighborhood, and I believe the proposal must be viewed through that neighborhood scale lens. The proposed text acknowledges the nature of the mid-block conditions in this neighborhood and would put into place bulk regulations that mediate between existing buildings at a variety of heights. It does not impose arbitrary height limits, but still provides an appropriate level of predictability of built form. Like many of my fellow commissioners, I have questioned the effect of this text would have on projects that are already underway in the affected area. I do not believe that land use applications should be wielded to stop individual developments. New York City's property owners have a reasonable expectation of predictability that we should take into account. As with many area-wide text amendments that come before us, I believe it to be important that we include a grandfathering provision to ensure that property owners are not left in the lurch with rules that change midstream. The proposal before us today strikes an appropriate balance, and I vote yes on this application as modified.
Commissioner Bessel,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo, Commissioner De La Use.
I have very mixed feelings about this proposal, but believe it addresses some of the community's primary concerns. And I really congratulate them for the effort that they put into this. I also believe that as modified, providing some relief to projects that are underway is a reasonable thing. I'm going to vote yes, although I would, if relief is granted and grandfathering as it moves through the council, I would hope that the council would consider limiting that relief to what would have been granted by the BSA.
Commissioner Dweck,
I'd like to associate myself with the comments of the chair, and I vote yes.
Commissioner Ephron,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
I would be voting no on the grandfathering provision if that were an option, but it's not. And overall, I agree completely with the comments of the chair about why this text amendment is an appropriate update of the outdated and anomalous zoning in the area, and I vote yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
I really do support a community's efforts to determine its own destiny, and I am certainly not a fan of these super tall towers that I do believe are out of context in many communities, but I also believe that our zoning code intends to offer transparency and predictability, and these are hallmarks of a functioning economy. So therefore, I vote yes, because of the provision that any project with foundations complete within a year will be grandfathered in.
A favorable report as modified has been adopted on calendar number 12. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 13, CD2, N170080ZCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning 457 Ocean Terrace for adoption on calendar number 13. Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Bessel,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner De La Use,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Ephron,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin, Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Calendar number 13 has been adopted. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 14, CD2, N170038ZAR, in the matter of an application for the grant of an authorization concerning 991 Todd Hill Road for adoption on calendar number 14. Vice Chairman Knuckles?
Yes.
Commissioner Bessel?
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo?
Yes.
Commissioner De La Use?
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Ephron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight? Commissioner Levin? Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Calendar number 14 has been adopted. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 97. Borough of the Bronx, calendar number 15, CD3 C150232 PQX. A public hearing in the matter of an application for the acquisition of property concerning the Iola Jordan Daycare Center.
Allison Grant from ACS.
Morning, Vice Chair and Commissioners. My name is Alison Grant. I'm the Chief of Staff of the ACS Division of Child and Family Wellbeing. I'd understood I was doing all together, but I guess I'm not.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what did you
Just
say?
real quick. Okay, so Iola Jordan first,
Yes.
which is at 421 East 161st Street in the Bronx, which is how ACS refers to this location by address. So ACS is here today in favor of the continued use of the space at the daycare center. As I've discussed previously, this, along with all of our spaces, were designed specifically for childcare services, meaning they follow regulations and standards to ensure that children are provided the highest quality care possible, along with the facility helping towards that effort. The current contracted program that provides early learn services, which is the name of the ACS contracted care system, is 1332 Fulton Avenue Daycare. The site name is Iola Jordan. It's a child care program, meaning that the families that are at the site are up to 200% of the poverty level and need to have a reason for care, meaning they are working or in an educational or vocational program, or they are homeless or looking for work up to 6 months. their eligibility is certified by ACS. Currently, there's 154 contracted seats, meaning 10 toddlers, which is one classroom, and 144 preschool students who are 3 to 5 years old. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions for Ms. Grant? Commissioner Levin.
Allison, you mentioned 154 contracted seats. What's the current enrollment?
It's around 2/3 of the site.
Okay, and is that
It's a low enrollment time of year.
where's the other third? Is that typical, or is there
Every site-
something going on
yeah.
at this site?
Nothing specifically wrong is going on at the site. Every program has their dips and rises. The fall tends to be a lower time of year as programs ramp up towards the winter because they focus on pre-K in the early fall. And a lot of the children here are 3 and 2. So I'm not personally concerned. Our program team, when they see issues that are pervasive, will put a program on what's called an enrollment improvement plan. And they work very intensively, providing technical assistance and training to ensure that they can fix whatever is going on. I have not been notified this site has an issue. I think we're watching it closely.
Commissioner Ephron.
First time
Did
we've
you have
heard
a
about,
follow-up,
Oh,
Anna?
I'm sorry.
Did you have a follow-up, Anna? I'm sorry.
Well, maybe she's going to ask it, so if she doesn't, I'll jump in.
Okay, all right.
well, perhaps I will. It's the first time I've heard about the enrollment improvement plan. Is this something that is shared as part of the process for lease renewal?
No, because it has nothing to do with the lease. So this is a program issue, and the contracts are on a different timeline than the leases and different timeline than the ULURPs. So we try to keep them separate because this is an ACS contract, and we try to not combine the two because they're such different matters. If there was an issue with the program, we would simply go through our process. Takes about a year because we want to do due diligence. So if there were an issue, this is not an issue with this program, but just so you know, generally, if there's a problem with the contractor, we would put them in heightened monitoring, which would be long after the enrollment improvement plan, not for this one again. And then if there's still an issue, we would put it on what's called a CAP, a corrective action plan. And if there was, we give them 3 to 6 months, and if they aren't able to repair whatever issues they may have, we then would end that contract and put a new program in place. So no matter what, there will be a quality early education program at these locations, whether or not it's 1332 Fulton Avenue Daycare or another contractor that works with ACS. That's why we don't include it. And when it comes to the leases or anything like that, because it's really about our state and federal funding and contractors.
May I ask a follow-up, if you don't
Of course,
mind?
please.
Are there any mechanisms within your department that are shared or flagged with the leasing team to note when enrollment has steadily gone down so that the site perhaps, we're concerned about the land use and whether or not
course.
it's an appropriate site.
Yeah.
How would that happen? And I realize it's not the case in this one, but
course.
you've opened up the door, and I'm just
Of
curious
course,
if
I'm
there
always
is
happy to
anything.
talk about the programmatic items. We get notices when the Department of Health, which is responsible for monitoring the health and safety, of course, ACS does so as well, but Department of Health and Mental Hygiene is responsible in their Bureau of Child Care for licensing every child care program in New York City, including all of ours. We're about 380 of their 2,000 licensed child care programs. So if the Department of Health sees that there's a facility issue related to something that we think might impact anything at the program, we get those notices, and as does ACS Facilities, and we coordinate to ensure that whether it's one of our 75 leases or one of our 300-plus non-city lease, meaning that the sponsor has their own lease or owns their own building, we ensure that it's fixed and keep it at the health and safety compliance that we are required and that we desire to have.
I'm asking a slightly different question, which is, let's assume there isn't a need in that neighborhood anymore. Is there something that is an index for
Okay,
your
I
agency?
understand your question now. Thanks for clarifying. I've been at ACS for 5.5 years now. We have closed very few sites due to a lack of need. Almost every community in New York City needs subsidized childcare. Even if it's an affluent community, there's typically a pocket of poverty. For instance, Upper East Side, there's NYCHA housing right there on 90th Street, right? So at Park Slope, there's programs because there still remains poverty in the area. So As of now, if anything, we would love to expand, but our state and federal funding has been cut, so we can't. So we are trying our best to retain every center that we have and do whatever we can to do so.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for Ms. Grant? Commissioner Levin?
Well, your last sentence there may be the answer to this question. I think we've all noticed that this facility is in an older building that appears to have a lot of maintenance programs. I mean, when a scope of work calls for replacing broken windows, which would seem to be a maintenance issue, not a capital improvement issue. I think at certification, a lot of us had questions about whether it was time to retire this site. And we know that in the area, there has been a significant amount of new development with community facility space available in new buildings. Is it appropriate for us to be approving this at this point? And has ACS been looking at other opportunities in the area for continuing this program in more modern space?
I'm the programmatic expert.
Yeah.
So I'm going to defer to DCAS in terms of whether or not they're looking at others, but I will say that ACS, our role, at least in my program division, is to say we want to continue childcare in this community, and we need to ensure it's healthy and safe. So my understanding is that my colleagues in ACS administration and the facilities unit, which is actually called real estate and design construction or something, that they ensure the site is safe. As I said, DOH wouldn't let a program continue to operate if it wasn't safe. Of course, things like that are concerning to me as well, but I really can't speak to whether or not we would be looking somewhere else. All I know is that the kids there are safe now, and that's what gives me comfort, because we wouldn't operate the program unless they were in a safe environment. They would be closed. So I don't know if you wanted, if we could speak to, let's defer to
Well, maybe
Dale.
subsequent speakers will get to. I fully appreciate
Yeah.
that your responsibility is limited to the program area, but it would seem that in supervising those programs, you would be the programmatic folks would be the first ones to recognize that there were significant problems with a facility, and to,
Yeah.
I would hope there's a process within ACS to set the wheels in motion to
There is, and
bring about overall improvement rather
client.
than continue to put
Yeah.
Band-Aids on.
Definitely, there is, and if there were an issue that, sometimes things on paper look worse than they do in person. I personally haven't been to this site in several years, but my colleagues have, as have my program monitoring team. They go out to all our sites every 6 to 8 weeks. Department of Health goes out at least annually, and if there's a concern, they go out more often. As I said, I rely heavily on my program team and on Department of Health, that if there's a health and safety issue, that they will notify us, and they will either give them what DOH does, to just make sure I lay it all out, is that they would give a violation. The program would have to fix the violation, and then they would have to go to an oath hearing, or Office of Administrative Trial Hearings, to fix the concern and pay a fine. We would never, as I said, our goal always is to have children be safe. So as long as the program has not been closed and our program monitoring team has not flagged it, we work with facilities closely, but if we don't think that it needs to be closed, we wouldn't do so, because it's disruptive to children and families.
Of course. Is there a history of violations that have had to go through the oath process that you described at this facility?
I actually don't know.
Don't know. Okay, thank you.
I apologize. We can look into that.
Any other questions for Ms. Grant? At least on this hearing. Well, let me just say, we don't doubt your dedication and devotion,
course.
nor that of ACS, but we assume and we expect that safety is always the threshold for any location.
Of course.
I think our assessment is, at this location, you've reached a point where there should be an alternative for these constituents, these very important constituents whose needs the city's going to attend to. But I would hope, and I think I speak for more than me, that before the 10-year lease period, which is before us for approval, has expired, that there would be another location identified for Iola Jordan Daycare Center.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Michael Betar from ACS.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Michael Betar. I'm an
You're here for questions only, right? Or
Correct.
if you wish to make a statement,
Just,
please.
I do want to make a small statement. As you are aware, the ACS has in place a mechanism to care for our buildings. It's a work order repair system where the center would call in, and then they would route these issues through us and the landlord. And so we do keep the facility in good shape as far as occupants are asking and concerned. That's the statement I want to make.
We wish to lessen your burden. That's what we're trying to do here. Any other questions for Mr. Betar? Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Scott Bernstein.
Morning. I'm actually going to defer this to my colleague, Dale. Let her answer any questions you have. That's all right.
Okay.
Okay?
Dale Lazarson?
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Good morning, Commission. And let me start by saying, on behalf of DCAS and everyone here.
Could you speak closer to the mic? Thank you.
Let me start by saying, in addition to good morning, on behalf of DCAS and all of us, we'd like to extend our condolences for the great loss of Commissioner Cantor. Very, very well respected. And I myself feel very fortunate to have met.
Thank you.
Okay, so to answer questions, I will echo something that Michael Betar said. As we know, and from previous presentations, ACS does have a work order system. So in the event that a provider locally identifies that there's a repair and maintenance concern, hopefully the work order system is working, they're notifying ACS, and ACS can deploy the appropriate remedies and corrective actions, whether it be through the landlord, if the landlord is responsible to maintain repair, or if ACS is directly. So while all of that is happening, with respect to this particular application, harking back to what Allison said, it is imperative at this time, and why we are in front of you and in support of this application, and we would like your support for ULURP, that we do not disrupt the operations. At this point in time, we are in dialogue to extend the occupancy and tenancy of ACS at this site. In order to do that, we require ULURP to sign a lease. In terms of evaluating the space, in terms of evaluating the site, in terms of looking at the market for alternatives, it is very true that this is a robust market and there are many new developments. However, as you are aware, the relocation of a city space need, particularly for childcare, is very special, and it takes quite a while. Many of the new developments in the area, while they appear to be available for community use space, some actually may not be. Or it may be that we don't have an opportunity with private developers or private owners. Some folks may not want to do business with the City of New York. We are competing with other potential providers of these kind of services. So in the very immediate area where this need is, to minimize the disruption for the continued operations, we are seeking your support of this ULURP application so that we can move forward, if it's deemed appropriate, with a lease of this space. Part of the lease for the space will obviously be a sweep of the facility for corrective material improvements for, as Commissioner Levin, as you said, for some of the more day-to-day improvements. Hopefully, the work order system has not failed, but if it is compromised in any way, we can certainly request that ACS work with the landlord to remedy that.
Questions? Commissioner Ephron, Commissioner Marin, Commissioner Ortiz?
What length lease renewal would trigger a review of other locations? Is there some magic number? Is a 20-year lease or 25-year lease something that would trigger an automatic review of market opportunities?
That's a great question, and no, not necessarily. More importantly, right, would be the geographic parameters that a program may need to operate in. So we do have some agencies, for example, they could operate from any borough, any place, and if they're looking for a long-term, we're going to do an extent, even if it's a renewal, we're going to look at an extensive search. Is there a better place for them to operate, for example? With specifically for the daycare center operations, because they are servicing very defined geographic areas, whether it's long-term or short-term, we're working within a very small net, right, a search net. So it's not so much the term that would determine if we look someplace else. It's for the daycare centers, is there something in the area that would not compromise the geographic parameter for the services being provided?
And that's done on every lease?
Not every lease. It depends upon whether or not we find, working with ACS, whether or not we have found that there are problems at a site, whether or not there's a condition at a site that can't be overcome, or if there's a future intention for a site that might compromise us. For example, if we have a site where in the very near-term future, the owner is expecting to redevelop it, right? And so maybe we can only go into something short-term, well, then we're immediately going to start a relocation. We certainly want to do exactly what we're doing. For example, here is we want to make sure that we are not going to disrupt the operations by securing as much time as we can while we get that underway.
And I assume this lease has the right to cancel?
Yes, it does have a city standard,
Thank you.
right, that's correct.
Commissioner Marin.
Ms. Lazar, good morning. I know that one of the obstacles that you presented was the fact that landlords may not be receptive to leasing out to an ACS type of city agency. And I understand that, but I also understand that in this community, there have been a myriad of buildings developed through HPD programs, which lend themselves to having a dialogue with HPD, especially since one of the things that they've been trying to do is making sure that these retail and community facilities do not lay fallow in communities. If in fact you've had a conversation with HPD regarding this or any other child care centers throughout the city, specifically in areas where the city is investing a lot of money to bring online new residential, community facility, and commercial. This neighborhood happens to be one, where there are at least 12 buildings that have been brought online by the city within the last 10 years. So I'm a little bit perplexed to see that Iola Jordan, through DCAS, has chosen to stay here, specifically when the scope of work is very intensive and extensive. So mine is not a question, but more of a statement. I think that the effort to dialogue with HPD to identify sites in newer buildings where there's newer technology would behoove the agency. I understand, and I really appreciate the fact that you don't want to disrupt children. That is key. But if in this process, how long have you been negotiating this lease? When did you find out you needed to negotiate this lease, and how long has this negotiation existed?
So the lease expired quite some time ago, 2013. At that point in time, I think we were on the fence about the prior administration 5-year renewals and how the programs were working, if I have learned correctly from Allison, and maybe moving into a new administration, desire for a long term. So this particular site may have been one of the sites that was sort of bundled in between, let's continue to operate here, let's continue to look at this, let's see if this site works. For the most part, if a site works for the program, right, barring any material physical conditions of dramatic concern that cannot be remedied, right, or something along the lines of what I previously said, then we would initiate a relocation. At the time that this expired, there was no real need to look into the market for a relocation because everything appeared to be just fine at the site, barring, again, regular maintenance, repair issues that may need to be addressed, which is why we with ACS do a very thorough due diligence of a site and of its ownership, relationship, et cetera. So at the time that this expired again, there was no need to relocate. There was no need to look. So we are focusing our efforts on the renewal. Over time, as perhaps some of the observations of the center, daily routine maintenance and repair issues and other scope items may have come to fruition, yes, there has been some dialogue, particularly, by the way, over the last couple of years, the increased dialogue with HPD. It's only been in the last, couple of years, right? We've seen all this new redevelopment and the opportunity for some partnering with HPD and EDC on some of these redevelopments. So in the recent, year or so, give or take, the dialogue has started. But at this point in time, We do need to focus on not disrupting the operation. It does not mean that we will not have flexibility. It does not mean, as Commissioner Ephron pointed out, yes, we have termination rights. It does not mean that due diligence and continued dialogue with ACS, whether it be the current program or other programs, isn't going to happen. It may continue, and at some point in time, there may be a desire, an analysis done that says that there is something better out there and available.
How often does DCAS go out to inspect these buildings? Because in a period of 4 years, I mean, you're saying that these are items that just happen to have happened recently. So did they exist for 4 years? I mean, what is your measurement to make sure that these corrective items are corrected within a time frame that's acceptable, and not when we get here for renewal on a lease where a landlord wants to make sure he gets his renewal and we have a 3-pager of intensive and extensive repairs?
So that's an excellent question, and I'll hark back to a presentation that we did to the commission a while ago. When a lease expires, specifically for daycare centers, ACS, its design and construction and real estate department, very robust group of individuals, they will do the inspection of the sites, and they will develop, because they're specialty sites, and they are governed by the Department of Health, they will do an inspection and develop a work list, general repair and maintenance items and more material items. So in 2013, it's very likely, or sometime at around that 13, 14, that is what happened. With the passage of time, however, for a number of issues, sometimes city processes, sometimes other things we can or cannot control, with the passage of time, both parties will get together and ask, before we move forward, do we need to revisit this list? What has happened since then? Perhaps it was short at one point, perhaps it was long. But the processes of both ACS and DCAS are to ask the question, if we have an improvement work scope that is aging, does it need to be refreshed? So that mechanism is there. Now, this is a daycare, so again, ACS primarily takes lead on the development of that scope of work for co-located centers with senior centers, for example, or for non-specialty centers. DCAS does have a very active role in the development of a scope. But for the daycare centers alone, ACS refreshes the scopes if the passage of time warrants it.
So who does the inspections to make sure that things are kept up to par in the facility?
Who does the inspections?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and the frequency.
So as I understand it, again, the way that this operates, with the provider, ACS has a work order system in place. So as the daily operations are going on, if there is something at the site that needs to be repaired or maintained, the service provider is contacting ACS, and ACS then will institute its work order program to deploy an inquiry and a resolution, whether that's with the landlord, should it be a landlord responsibility, or whether it's direct with ACS and its own providers. That is how it occurs. Now also, as we heard from ACS during a recent presentation, in addition to that work order system, ACS has instituted a regular sort of watch. I can't recall what Mitch Gibson referred to it as, but they do periodically go out and inspect, irrespective of getting a call perhaps from a service provider. ACS is actually, they've employed more individuals now, and they've implemented a program where they go out and they actually do routine inspections as well. The frequency of that I'm not certain about.
So inspections, you're saying that then you don't necessarily go out and inspect the building unless you hear a complaint from somebody? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
For the daycare centers, DCAS is not doing the inspections. Again, this is really
It's ACS.
Correct. And what ACS is doing is two things. They are absolutely reactive when they're hearing from the service
I
provider,
understand that,
but they're also proactive
and I
with a new
appreciate the
program that
response.
they've
I'm trying to
implemented.
figure out the frequency and the inspection. I understand that. I'm
Okay.
trying to figure out if there is an inspection scheduled every year, every 6 months, every 2 months, what that frequency is, if there is an inspection schedule, or if it just happens. So I guess ACS can get back to us.
Yes,
Thank you.
we can ask for the frequency.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. Along those lines, it sounds like, at the time of lease renewal, as you said, that sort of triggers ACS to go in and, review the needs of the site and develop a work plan that would be incorporated into the lease renewal. Is that correct?
Well, as I said, there are routine, regular, irrespective of a lease expiration or coming up, there are
I
routine
understand
ones.
that.
But yes, in
But you
concert
said-
with an expiration,
We're talking about the
absolutely.
lease renewal, so.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So it doesn't sound like that process includes, or I should say that process seems to benefit the existing site. Doesn't seem to be an opportunity to look at the market. You'd said that they develop a work plan to be incorporated into lease renewal, but here we have a site where there are alternatives around, and I also note you added a lot of qualifiers. There may not be an interest in the part of the developer. There may not be other sites. You didn't necessarily say and that you've looked at those opportunities. So there doesn't seem to be a space here to acknowledge that there are other real estate opportunities, which I imagine if that were part of some process, at the moment of lease renewal, could offer leverage in negotiations. What landlord would want to lose, a paying tenant? And so there's a win-win. And there's an opportunity at lease renewal to potentially relocate. We understand relocation is a pain in the butt for everybody, right? But we're talking long-term. So is there an opportunity to incorporate glance, at market conditions and other sites?
Yes, so we've been focusing on, there are parallel tracks, if you will, for lack of a better way to state that happen when something is coming up for expiration. This is for not only specialty centers, but in general, the DCAS processes with our agencies. We've been focusing on the scope and the investigation of the current site. Simultaneously, when we know that it's coming up, the leasing side of this equation must be cognizant of not only the intended, proposed, speculated terms and conditions of getting into a renewal transaction at the current site, but also what is in the market. Because to your point, yes, we want to know, A, are we doing a good job on this?
Are we
But
getting
more
a good deal?
importantly, if in this process, right, of double checking, we identify something that may be a better proposition all around, yes, we have an absolute opportunity to look. So both processes combined offer this opportunity. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. In 2013, if there was no key concerns about needing to relocate, leasing may have gone through the quick market review, right, to make sure that what we intend to enter into on a renewal is fair and reasonable, equitable, and still support so that we don't unnecessarily relocate. And also, again, in 2013, we were somewhat on the fence between the administration of long-term, short-term. With the passage of time, in refreshing and looking again at this now, things have begun to come into fruition in the area in a much more materialized way, not just a conceptual, specularized way, right? But we're very far along with this. So it doesn't mean that just because we're this far along, we should make a bad decision, right? Better late than never applies. But now where we are is at another juncture. In order to enable a thorough due diligence in that regard, to look at the prospect opportunities, to determine if any of them could be plausible over time. A lot of conversations have to happen, a lot of investigation due diligence. We have a situation where we need to enter into something here to protect the operation, which then again goes back to the earlier question. Yes, we will have flexibility in the lease.
Although, acknowledge that, what is the likelihood that a landlord would, terminate this particular tenant in an environment like this? I mean, this is all part of a negotiation. This building, it seems highly unlikely there's a line of users waiting to fill the space. So,
for critical operations like this, we do our best, and we've been very successful with our talent to make sure that the termination option is the tenant's option, not the landlord's. So from a disruption, what's the likelihood a landlord would terminate us? We hope it would be very low, and
So highly unlikely.
that's correct.
Okay, so even at this juncture, you could do something like a month-to-month and be looking at other opportunities that are viable.
But that doesn't give anyone any comfort. That also doesn't give a landlord any comfort, you know? But we all own properties, there's underwriting, you know, month to month is risky. Yes, while it's unlikely that a landlord may issue a 30-day cancellation notice, right, realistically, that's very uncomfortable. Also operationally for ACS, right? It's very important to demonstrate the continued commitment to the communities. And there are certain requirements of reporting to the communities when you have an unsteady situation of potentially, you know, the loss of a facility, unlikely as it may be.
Obviously, you wouldn't do this if you didn't have something lined up that's viable and more realistic. But the answer to the question is, you don't know what those options are in the market because they weren't available in 2013. Today, they might be, but you're very far along, and it doesn't quite make sense according
I'm not
to
saying
DECA.
that it doesn't make sense. What I'm saying is better late than never. We are very far along. We do need to move forward to protect the operation, not disrupt it. We have other stakeholders as well, other agency and controllership stakeholders that are interested in making sure that we have secure transactions, even with flexibilities. We need to focus on that. Which is the worst of two evils? Remain under a month-to-month situation, or focus on ensuring that there's no disruption if we elect to do due diligence and look elsewhere.
Okay? Any other questions for Ms. Lazarson? Commissioner Levin?
Yes, what's the proposed lease term here? Our briefing package just says it's a term to be determined. Have you
Yes.
determined yet?
And that's, yes, actually, we are proposing a 10-year lease.
10-year lease, thank you.
Yes.
Let me try to bring this home. Ms. Lazarson, in the event, if this lease is approved, and I say if because we have to vote on it, is it the intention of DCAS, in consultation with its client and in consultation with HPD, do you intend to look for other locations, ultimately, to house the Iola Jordan Daycare Center? Is that the intent of ACS? Would it be the intent of ACS if this lease were to be approved?
If I may, I'm going to defer to my colleague Scott Bernstein, who is handling strategy.
He'll have to whisper to you because he can't come back.
Okay.
He had his shot and he didn't take it, so.
Yes, so the answer is very standard for most of our processes. Yes, actually. The intention is, right, to continue, not to start, but to continue dialogue with HPD and with ACS to determine whether or not there is something that might be better suited.
I mean, you see the time that we've taken to discuss this
Yes.
site, right? That's not for, as they say, not for nothing.
Yes.
Any other questions for Ms. Lazarson? Thank you.
Thank you.
Judith McCray? Is she here? I think this is McCray. Not here? Okay. Judith McCray? Okay. Are there any other speakers on this item? There being none, the matter is closed.
Okay, Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 16 through 19. Calendar number 16, CD 16, C160084 PQK. Concerning Shirley Chisholm Childhood Education Center. Calendar number 17, CD 16, C160021 PQK. Concerning the Shirley Chisholm Daycare Center 1. Calendar number 18, CD 8, C150282 PQK. Concerning the Friends of Prong Heights 2 Daycare Center. Calendar number 19, CD 9C150223, PQK, concerning All My Children Daycare Center. Public hearing in the matter of applications for the acquisition of property.
So, Commissioners, you will recall from Monday, we're going to consider these 4 items, all in Brooklyn. The Shirley Chisholm Childhood Education Center, the Daycare Center, Friends of Crown Heights, Child Care, and All My Children in one hearing. Allison Grant.
Hello, Vice Chair and Commissioners.
And you'll have 15 minutes.
Great. So I'm Alison Grant. I'm the Chief of Staff for the ACS Division of Child and Family Wellbeing. I will be speaking on all 4 sites that the Secretary read. So I'll just give a very slight overview, and then I'll take your questions. So all 4 of these locations were designed specifically for child care services, meaning that they follow regulations to ensure that we're providing quality care in these sites as it pertains to facility standards. These programs are child care and dual eligible programs, meaning that families must be at some of the sites up to 200% of the poverty level and others 100% of the poverty level, depending on which site we're talking about. But in short, these are low-income families who are in need of care. All 4 of these programs operate 5 days a week, 12 months a year, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Per our contracts with them. I can answer specific site questions. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. I don't think running through all the numbers would necessarily be helpful, so I would answer the questions if you have them.
Very good. Questions for Ms. Grant? Commissioner Reade.
Morning. I was wondering
Morning.
if you could, I think you may have before, it may have slipped my mind, the frequency of inspections ACS does?
Yes, I'd be happy to answer that. Thank you, Commissioner. So as I said before, my program, the Division of Child and Family Wellbeing, goes out every 6 to 8 weeks to our contracted system. We have 380 sites approximately, and we visit every single one of those sites. We have a program monitoring team who I've referred to before. Specifically, just to talk about it, each of them has their caseload of about 20 or so programs, and they are responsible for going out to do different monitoring protocols at each of those sites. The first page of every monitoring protocol is health and safety. I don't think I've said that before. So it is health and safety. They are not facility experts. They are child care experts. Many of our staff, most of them have a master's in early education or related fields, such as social work, et cetera. But they had been previously teachers or social workers in child care sites. So they look for things like a broken window or outlets not being covered or a bleach bottle being out or an egress sign not being lit, things like that. It's more comprehensive. But they do look at that at every site visit that they take every 6 to 8 weeks. And if there's something that is of concern, they will contact ACS facilities to ensure they're aware of it. And they remind the program of the work order system that my colleague, Mr. Betar, spoke of. And if it is something that they shouldn't be able to fix themselves with their janitor, they are told to call and put in a work order. My understanding is that ACS administration is supposed to be visiting every site annually. I've also mentioned Department of Health and Mental Hygiene visits every site annually, unless there's a concern, which would make both of those entities go out more often. So that, I think, hopefully answers the timeline question of inspections by ACS.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Commissioner Dweck and then Commissioner De La Ruz.
I had a question at the review session on Monday about some of the extensive comments and recommendations from the community board. I think it was on the Childhood Education Center, the Shirley Chisholm Childhood Education.
Which address?
I can give you the,
Not Center 1.
2023 Pacific.
Okay, yeah.
so I don't know if you're going,
There's 2 of them.
if you
That's
would-
why I'm asking which address, because they both
one?
have
It's
names.
6971.
Okay.
There's 2 of them.
Right, right, right. I don't know if you'd be the one to answer the questions or if DCAS is going to step in.
I'll see what the question is, and then I'll
Well,
defer to my
there was some
colleague if
the
that's okay.
questions are, there were some recommendations from the community board, extensive list of recommendations, and I wanted to get some follow-up on what was being done about those recommendations.
There's a scope of work questions. So Michael Bottari, I believe, is signed up for questions after me from ACS administration. So he can try to address them after I am done.
Great,
And if not, Dale Lazarson from DCAS will address them.
thank you.
Thank you.
Don't have any? Commissioner Ephron.
Sorry, this is more a comment, since you are the early childhood education arm within your new and improved name as well. It just seems like such a great opportunity, particularly since you have two Shirley Chisholm Childhood Centers, if there was some sort of signage so that her name isn't lost to posterity and actually remains active. I don't know if there is one, but if there is any opportunity for education about one of our great Americans who is a New Yorker.
I appreciate that, and I also respect her very much, and I appreciate that wanting to keep her name. My understanding actually is that one of these sites is no longer called that, but we do have other programs that actually, one of these is, and at the time of application 2.5+ years ago, it had been. So that's why we like to go by addresses, because I frankly don't know everyone's center name when I have 380 centers in addition to 15,000 other providers. So, but yes, I agree. I believe there is signage at all 4 of these locations. If there's not, I will ask admin to look into it.
To be clear, I mean signage with an explanation about her history. I think it's a really great opportunity for family education.
I agree, and I know that just so you know, every single one of our programs that's contracted with Early Learn has a parent advisory council, and many of them do things like that around the history of their center and why it's called a certain name, and I agree, it's very important.
Other questions? Yeah, given that you don't have many options on these buildings built in the early 70s,
Yes.
signage take on an added importance.
Yes, and I see that in all these pictures, these sites do have signs, which is not always the case, and I'm very happy to see that today, so.
Okay. For questions only, Michael Betar. Questions for Mr. Betar? Commissioner Dweck.
Michael, thank you. So, in reference to the Shirley Chisholm Childhood Education Center at 69-71 Saratoga Avenue, the community board had an extensive list of recommendations. I can list them for you, or if you have a copy, or if you're familiar with them.
I'm familiar with them.
Okay, so if you can speak to what is being done on the recommendations, I'd appreciate it.
You are probably aware that the scope of work does cover each one of those items. There are no plans outside of that in terms of when the lease is being signed. There is a timeline in terms of waiting for some of those bigger items until the lease is signed. What I'm saying is the small items are being taken care of. I looked at our work order system before I came, and a lot of those are in the system. Sometimes they take a while to do, but the larger scope of items will be addressed when the lease is actually signed. It would be part of the scope of work, basically, is what I'm saying.
And how long post-lease signing would
That's a
that
good
work?
question. I think that is a timeline that's negotiated with DCAS in terms of what goes to the tenant, what goes to the landlord, and then a schedule is executed in terms of timeline.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Betar? Commissioner Ephron.
I have a sense that old code doesn't require sprinklers. Is there any conversation about installing sprinklers for a long-term lease for childcare centers?
There's definitely a conversation about that. Thank you for bringing that up, and ACS is aware of that. In this building, there are no sprinklers in the entire building, and it has to do with what the age of the children we have served so far does not require sprinkling. So as for the future, I am unaware of any plans, and I will defer to my colleague here. But I'm unaware of plans, I mean, in terms of overhauling the whole building with sprinklers. You pick the one that doesn't. The remainder of the buildings are sprinkled, the other three, I mean. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well,
Sadly, it does.
Since you raised it, what is the age, minimum age for children?
Toddlers and infants.
That would require
The DOH
sprinkler?
requires that the toddlers and the infants requires sprinkling, not school age or preschool. Well, it's an interpretation. I think it's, the age has to do with, if they're toddlers or infants, you must sprinkle. In this case, we don't have them in this building.
Very strange requirement.
I don't think it's even required for school age.
Was there a question over here?
I have a question.
My colleague-
Is that a policy decision or is that a code decision?
It's a code decision, in my opinion.
Other questions? Thank you, sir. Dale Lazarson. It's been a long time.
Hello. I am going to, on one of the sites, 2023 Pacific, I'm going to ask to join me at the podium Jason Ortiz, since we were doing this as a group.
Okay.
Jason is one of our assistant directors, and
Right.
he is taking lead on that particular transaction. In general, I'd like to offer two answers to comments to the questions. Scope timelines. As Michael Betar emphasized, pending execution of a lease, attached to which is a scope of work. And under a lease, when a landlord feels comfortable that that lease is signed, material work will get underway and investments will be made. The contracts that are currently placed, whether they're month-to-month situations, licenses, et cetera, do hold both parties responsible for continued repair and maintenance. So to the community board's questions, the majority of those items, as Michael suggested, are included in the scope that will be attached to the lease, including the mechanical system, the dumbwaiter, the pointing on the brick facade, et cetera. But other things, though, the building will be routinely watched, and repairs and maintenance will continue on a daily basis until the lease is signed and the investment for the material matters can be addressed. For the timeline matter, the majority of the leases will call for, upon execution, there's some administrative work that happens between the agency and the landlord, bringing contractors on board, et cetera. Once all of that is settled through a bidding process, typically, it's about 18 months to all the work is complete. And that is because the facilities are occupied, and therefore there is a phasing program that must take place. Sometimes which happens after hours, sometimes depending upon the materiality, if it's not too great on the actual line item, be done during the day, phased to not be disruptive or put the occupants of the building in any harm's way. So, but typically the full job, we're seeing on average be completed about 18 months after with that phasing. And one last thing I'll emphasize to Michael, Commissioner Ephron, you have mentioned sprinklers for quite some time. So yes, as Allison suggested, this is not a policy issue, it's a building code issue. But the ACS Real Estate Design and Construction Department is well aware of this matter. And as Michael said, the dialogue is happening on it.
Commissioner Ephron.
Thank you for addressing it. I think, since I have mentioned it quite frequently, and I believe our chair has mentioned it as well, one question that's never been clear to me that I would like clarification on is if this were a lease for a new building, one built in the last 5 years, would sprinklers be required for all of these aged children?
So that's interesting again, because by building code for the intended use, the building code would drive it.
Mm-hmm.
When ACS went to look at the facility, let's say the building code said you didn't have to for the intended use. When ACS went to look at the facility, when we site selected the facility, the decision for ACS operations would be made whether or not it's prudent to have it sprinkled.
Mm-hmm.
No, but that's not your question.
My point is that I imagine that the new space,
Of course.
a 10-year lease in a new space,
yes.
would have sprinklers
Of
for the
course,
same
in
age
the last
children.
5 years, probably.
And I guess I feel irresponsible as somebody who's being asked to reauthorize a lease of some length, more than 5 years, more than a minute, actually, to allow children to be in a building that by code, because it's an older building, does not require sprinklers. But if we were approving a lease in a new building, those same children, same age, would have sprinklers. I understand it's a code issue, but as Commissioner Marin mentioned, perhaps there could be a policy change.
I know that the dialogue is happening at ACS about this. No one's going to stand just behind code if the code doesn't offer the required protection recommendations for the operation. The Department of Health is part of this dialogue, et cetera, so.
It could be a contractual requirement, could it
Right.
not?
Right, exactly.
It could be a,
Yes, it
yeah,
could
a
potentially,
lease, a
absolutely,
lease
of
term.
course.
Yes.
Of course, it could potentially be that, absolutely.
Did Mr. Ortiz have something to add?
Well, we are here to answer questions about the four sites from the real estate perspective, if you have any questions on the transactions for each site. And Jason Ortiz is involved significantly with the 2023 Pacific Avenue site. I have the other ones.
Questions? Commissioner De La Uz.
Can you just outline the length of the leases for each of the properties?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I have that for you, yes. So 36 Ford, which is no longer known as All My Children, 36 Ford Street, is a 5-year term. This is a residual impact from a prior administration matter, from substantial completion. So realistically, we're talking about almost 7 years, give or take, once we are able to execute this. However, for the purposes of ULURP, we also have a renewal option here. So the opportunity right now that we can capture is a little more than 12 years. Yeah, it'll be about 12 years, give or take. Also on 36 Ford, we have a preferential right to buy this building. For 671 Prospect Place, let me come back to that. For 6971 Saratoga, this is a 10-year proposed lease opportunity. For 2023 Pacific, this is from substantial completion. This is also a 10-year from substantial completion, and we also have 2 5-year renewal options. So the opportunity for the continuation of services at 2023, if I'm correct, is 20 years at this point. For 671 Prospect Place, right now, the proposed term is very short term. It runs to April of 2020. That is a transactional matter. The owner remains very interested, as does the city, in a long-term presence here. But we have a long way with negotiations to go to secure a long-term lease. So for now, both parties have agreed to put a triage approach in place. Let's get a lease in place that allows everyone to exhale through 2020, and the facility's in very, very good condition, through 2020 while we work out some lease-related transactional matters.
Any other questions for either Ms. Lazarson or Mr. Ortiz? Commissioner Levin.
So on 671 Prospect Place, if the conversations do, 2020 is right around the corner in ULURP terms. We were just talking about a lease that expired in 2013, and here we are 4 years later. So we could be there before we know it. Would a new lease following April 2020 have to come back through ULURP?
Not if, through this dialogue, everyone understands that the community has requested the continuation of services. So we are not asking for a ULURP approval from you with a duration of time. That is up to you in your report. If it is unlimited for the continued use, no, we will not bring it back through to you.
Okay, so
If
the
it's for a new
application,
site,
the application is for no particular term, just
that's correct,
acquisition of
and
the
this is
site.
why, right, to provide the city the greatest flexibility, should during negotiations we have an opportunity to buy, should we have a longer-term lease opportunity, that's correct.
Okay, and the other applications are for the terms you just described?
No, all of the applications in front of you, if I'm correct, they should all read terms to be determined. And
Well,
that
they don't.
provides the city the greatest flexibility at your discretion through these hearings to understand what we're intending, the greatest flexibility. Hopefully you will return approval and support of these transactions for the longest term permitted, unlimited.
Or you're asking us to approve acquisition without any limitation on term, is that right?
Well, we would like that. It would provide the city the greatest flexibility, but that is within your jurisdiction.
Well, but you've applied for something.
No, the actual applications don't state lease terms intentionally.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the answer, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Thank you both.
Thank you.
At least Iola Jordan has sprinklers, right? Good. Right. Are there any other speakers on this item? There being none, the hearing is closed. Madam Secretary, do you know the question I'm about to ask? Is there any other business before the commission?
No Vice Chair Knuckles.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Chair.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Thank you for behaving.
Otherwise, that gavel goes right